I want to continue my series on how China saved me, at least the first video, because I only talked about the things that happened to me when I first arrived in China, my first impressions. So here I am, 9 years later. Well, actually, no, 11 years later, but after in my ninth year of teaching in China, and I'm in a third. I've moved twice since I was first in Nanjing, and to another province, Shandong province, which turns out to be considered China's Holy Land, because the guy here behind me was born here. And of course, his name is Confucius. And so I just want to confirm that those impressions that I first had when I came to China in just the first few months, they've just been reinforced over and over. I have too many stories to tell, but what I've decided to do is talk about 3 stories, one for each city that I've lived in, including Nanjing. So first one is here in Yantai. I was really interested in going to see the Ba Shen, they're called, which are the 8 immortals. So they're like mysterious forces, kind of gods, that have long existed in the Chinese psyche from the very beginning and have played a big role in China's development and thinking. And so there's a place nearby called Penglai, near Yantai here, which is the place to go see the 8 immortals, or go to the place where they've been apparently seen before. And so anyway, I decided I was going to take a journey there. It was maybe I don't know, 45 minutes, an hour by high-speed train to get there. And so I'd never done this before, at least in this area. So I started out by asking my student, how do I get there? And so he was giving me different ideas and everything. And in the end, one thing that he did that stuck out was he was loaning me his iPad so that I could, because he thought that would make it easier for me to find my way if I had his iPad. I think because it had a certain app on it. And anyway, he was willing to loan that to me for a few days. And that, right away just struck me as I couldn't imagine a Canadian student doing this with, say, a visiting Chinese professor. So that was just the beginning. So in the end, I got some other ideas about how to get there from someone else. And so I ended up following their ideas about which train to take and so on. And that's what I did. So I just went on my own. I don't know Chinese. I can't read Chinese. I can only speak a little bit. And so I made the journey to Penglai. And because of my previous experience, I just trusted that everything would work out fine, because it always has. I've always found my way. There's always been someone there to help me out. And I've even started to give this term that I first referred to about people looking out for me all the time in Nanjing as kind of micro-harmonizers is what I call them, that because everyone does it. It's pretty widespread, and so they're just like little kindnesses that they extend to me as a foreigner and stranger to help me out if I'm ever having difficulty. So I just sort of conceptualized China as filled with these micro-harmonizers, and they're just so extensive, so readily available to you as a foreigner, or anyone, I guess, traveling in China, that you can rely on them. They're always going to be there. So traveling to Penglai, I just thought, well, I'll do the best I can, and if I get a little lost, I can ask someone, and that's what I did. And so it was a fantastic journey, because Whenever I had problems, I would just ask someone, and typically maybe student age people, but it could be anyone. And they would literally like drop everything and help me out. They would go and ask someone else if they could help, or if I needed someone who knew English, they would find someone who knew English so I could communicate better with them. And anyway, like in the end, the whole journey, it was basically a whole day trip. So I went and visited the places I wanted to visit. Took the train to Panglai, caught a taxi, and trusted the taxi driver to take me to the place to get the tickets, and he did all that, and as far as I know, helped me get the best deal I could. And like just the trust that this generates, micro-harmonizers, you can't believe it. I just try. Maybe I'm too naive, but it hasn't hurt me yet, at least in traditional China. And so it went by perfectly. I saw what I wanted to see. I had to catch the train on the way back. And so I came back basically fairly late at night. I can't remember, 9 or 10, but it was dark. And I was just thinking the image people have in the West about China, that this dark totalitarian dictatorship, and that, you couldn't trust anyone kind of thing. And here I was walking alone at night in this city that at the time I'd only been in for a matter of months, and didn't know Chinese, couldn't read Chinese, but felt completely safe. Walking at night, it's pitch black, of course the lights are on, but just walking along, I'm imagining someone from the West would think this would be a terrifying situation to be in. But instead, I felt totally safe, totally protected, and just as I was having that reflection, I'm telling the truth here. I actually had that thought as I was walking along. A guy is coming up on his e-bike behind me, and he just yells out, "Hello!" Just like this, just like people do who see me. They just assume I speak English, and they usually want to say something. They usually say hello. And so here was a guy calling out hello, basically in the middle of all this darkness as I'm walking along alone on the street. And then I was some distance from the university where I stay, where my residence is. And so I needed to get a taxi. It was going to be a long walk otherwise, because the buses had stopped, because they stopped fairly early. But no problem at all. I went and found a guy, and I communicated to him as much as I could. And he booked me a taxi and ordered a taxi for me, and I was in a taxi literally in a matter of just a couple of minutes. So just incredible, like being taken care of from the beginning to the end. So I returned safely to the university. I had a great experience, tons of help along the way whenever I needed it. And this is, in a totally different province, hundreds of kilometers away from where I first landed in Nanjing, or first started working in Nanjing, and a long ways southwest of me. And so my second story, that's Yantai, and then my second story is about Jinan, where I used to live before I came to Yantai. And I was in Jinan for about 5 years, and I used to go cycling all the time to the countryside. I always wanted to leave the city and get out into rural China. I've done lots of traveling, and I know the most interesting, unique things you see are in the rural areas of countries, not in the cities. The cities tend to look, pretty similar, and I would say China is similar that way. It's getting pretty kind of westernized buildings. Traditional parts of cities, of course, are interesting, but I would find in the countryside almost everything was interesting. and different, seeing how the farmers worked and so on, going into their villages. So this is what I used to do all the time, because I was only about 5 kilometers from the Yellow River, and I could, so just north of it in the city of Jinan, and I would just cycle down to the Yellow River and cross it. It was easily, just 5 kilometers away, really straightforward, just one street. I would ride up, and everything changed when I went to the other side of the river. And so I was suddenly in a rural area. There weren't any skyscrapers and so on. And so this is what I would do all the time. And of course, you have an even less chance of coming across someone who knows English. So, and you go into these villages, and people really want to talk to you, especially the kids. They'll run up to you and want to try and talk. And so this is actually the biggest motivation for me to work harder on learning Chinese, is so I can speak to people in the villages, and so they're even more friendly and helpful, I found, than in the cities. So believe it or not. And so I would go into these areas cycling around, and I'd be constantly asked to come into, if I went in a restaurant to get something to eat, because I usually would go for a day or several hours cycling. There'd be someone who would invite me over to their table to join them. And again, they didn't know any English. This was all through my minimum Chinese and, just body language and so on. And this would happen all the time. Even one place, these young guys invited me over to have beer with them, and yang rou char, which is kind of lamb kebabs, I guess is the best way, spicy lamb kebabs. Really delicious. So I joined them, and I'm drinking with them and eating the yang rou char and enjoying their time. But then they had to leave, and we got each other's WeChat. And as soon as they went to leave, another table invited me over to their table, and it was a family. This is what it was like everywhere I went in China, like around or Jinan, at least, in the small villages. It was just unbelievable. Wanting to, me to sit with them, or they wouldn't let me pay for anything. I got invited into people's homes, and which I think I've got some pretty rare pictures. I have never seen anyone with a picture of inside a rural Chinese home, because one thing I noticed these people were invariably poor, but they would have a poster, literally a poster of Mao above the kitchen table, kind of like over the hearth of a fireplace almost, and they would have personal family pictures around it. I saw this more than once. And they would just invite me in for tea and maybe peanuts, things like that. One place I just really wanted to see what the roof of their home was like, or just a home was like. And I actually asked the guy if I could go up on the roof, or if he could take me up on the roof. And he did. And because I wanted to see the solar panels that everyone just seemed to have, even in the poor areas. And so I was up on the roof, because this guy was just letting me see the roof, and he was drying different vegetables. And so anyway, unbelievably friendly. And anyway, the specific story, I've got off track a bit, is when I went on one of these country trips, one trip I came across a bunch of motocross enthusiasts. So they were a bunch of guys, like maybe in their, I don't know, I think in their 30s, I would guess. They weren't too old, but they weren't too young either. So there were a couple kids there and so on. And they were just enjoying the hills right beside the Yellow River and their dirt bikes, showing me pictures. They were doing jumps and things like this. And anyway, they were having a barbecue down right beside the Yellow River. And they asked me to join them. So, I'd just been cycling up there, And I said, okay. I sat down and just filled me up with tons of food. Again, Yangro char, my favorite, and beer. And we tried to communicate our best. I think the daughter knew a little bit more English. She was only like 12 or something. Communicated. We exchanged WeChat IDs, and the big story, I got to know these guys as best I could, not knowing each other's language. And I ended up, at the later part of the day, these guys were heading back, and I had to head home. And so I cycled back, to my apartment again on the campus of the school. And this guy actually called me to make sure that I had arrived home safely. And this is just unbelievable. And this happened more than once. This was like a stranger I met, I just spent a few hours with, and he wanted to make sure I got home safely by calling me. And so this is the kind of stuff I've gotten used to over the years, and it is completely different than any experience in the West. In Canada, yes, people can be helpful, but here it's exponentially more, and exponentially more unexpected, I'd say. And so the third and final story, which is really the biggest one, it's the big image I have that represents the kindness in China compared to where I came from, Canada, the West, whatever you want to call it. And that was when I had kidney stones in Nanjing, in my second year in Nanjing. So I'd already been there some time, and I developed kidney stones because I wasn't drinking enough. And anyway, a student took me to the hospital and everything when I had the pains, and so I was taken to hospital fairly quickly, and it was a good quality hospital, I think, for foreigners. And a brand new hospital, just as good as any in Canada, maybe even more modern, probably more modern. And anyway, and so I needed to have some surgery. And of course, because of my status, I found out later, I was having the top surgeon, the dean of medicine apparently, do the procedure because I was a professor, and they knew all this. And anyway, that's not the part that really blew me away. I get used to this status differential, which you don't, really feel at all in Canada or the West. It's definitely a status-oriented society here, but it's not that. I don't need my ego massaged. What blew me away was just the visitors. I mean, my students were coming in to visit me. They were feeling terrible about me being alone, away from my family, in hospital in China, and, that I didn't know the language. I must feel so lonely. And so students would come and visit, and my boss came and visited, Associate Dean, and he brought his wife and daughter, and the thing is, they would not visit like a typical, maybe Canadian type of visit where you stay for, I don't know, half an hour. They would stay for 2-3 hours, and my assistant would stay for maybe half a day. And so I was just not used to all this attention. And just incredible people coming in. And I even asked one of my students, I said, is this all because I'm a foreigner? Is this because I'm not used to this? And she said, no. She said, actually, if she was in her hometown and she was in hospital, she said, you actually don't tell people that you're in hospital because you're going to get so many visitors. It gets exhausting because of the huge number of visitors you get. And she's Chinese, so it wasn't that I was a foreigner. I mean, that was part of it, but not totally. It's in Chinese culture. You're in hospital, you're going to be lonely, so your friends come and visit you. I had my own room at first. I was being treated really well and tons of attention. I never felt lonely. I never felt scared or anything. I've been in China long enough to really trust that people are all doing their very best, like, and as the kindness is just off the scale. And so I wasn't fearful at all. So I did the procedure, and I'm trying to remember exactly how it worked. I don't remember all the details. This was, like 10 years ago or something. And so anyway, I got released from hospital, but I had to return a few days later, I believe, to, I don't know, get checked or stitches pulled out or something. And anyway, when I returned, I didn't have my own room anymore. I had a shared room. And so my assistant came to visit me again and had been there for a few hours, talking to me, keeping me company. And then he felt really bad because he had to leave. And I'm going, this attention is more than I've ever imagined, ever witnessed, imagine, or could even dream of. Like, go do your work. Don't worry about me. That was basically my reaction. And he just thought, no, he felt bad that he had to leave after being there for 2-3 hours. And anyway, he felt so bad, he mentioned it to the woman sitting in the chair at the foot of the bed beside me. And she was the mother of the boy in the bed who was there for whatever medical reason. I don't know what it was, but he said something to this woman to look out for me while he was gone. And I guess I knew he had done that, but I didn't expect much. And anyway, I'd go and literally just have to roll over in my bed to, reach for the hot thermos of hot water that they would give to every patient and put it on their bedside table, a huge thermos of hot water to pour for your tea. And so I would reach over to go pour my tea, and she'd go, no, and she'd rush over to the hospital bed, and she'd tell me not to, and I go, no, it's okay. And she'd insist on pouring my tea. She wouldn't even let me do it myself. And so she would pour my tea, and then she'd go back to her seat. And so it was like this. And then when lunchtime rolled around, I didn't know how to get food and so on. You don't have huge nursing staff on the hospital, so this could be part of the reason why people would come to the hospital. I don't know all the details about that. All I know is like the families were there for like virtually all day long. This woman was there. She would come in the morning and she would stay all day long to see her son and talk to him all day long. And she would cook breakfast, lunch, and supper and bring them to him. And of course bring that in a bag or something and basically give that to him at breakfast, lunch, and supper time. And so she had some extra food. She felt really bad that I didn't have food, and so she started giving me food to eat that she had cooked at home for her son. And so, it's this kind of caring that I've years of getting used to. At first, you can't believe it. Like, honestly, it was just so over the top. My Western mind was just suspicious in the first months in Nanjing because, basically the thinking in the West is if something seems too good to be true to believe, it probably isn't true, and that someone basically is trying to take advantage of you, manipulate you in some way. This is our Western way of thinking, which is just really, it just shows you how impoverished our minds are when it comes to caring and thinking about others. Because that suspicion, because I have these repeated kind of micro-harmonizing experiences in China, like I could go on and on. I could make a year of videos probably about it. There are so many. I'm just highlighting a few. And so to experience that, so anyway, it took some time. It took a few years for me to finally go, no, this is actually legitimate. people are just generally being kind. And the only place where I found that caused me to be a little naive was actually in the most westernized city in China, in Shanghai. I would have that attitude that was slowly cultivated in me from my experiences living in more traditional cities in China. And I'd go to a westernized city like Shanghai, and so I had a couple of incidents where people were trying to take advantage of me, where I was kind of tricked into something. And I just put this all down to, that's the westernized part of China. That's the ugliness coming in from my culture. This is what it's doing to Chinese culture. And I really believe that to such an extent. I get why China wants to close the border sometimes and not let too much Western influence come in, because that's the side of it I see. I mean, yes, there's innovation and all that, but there's all this focus on individualism, and China is about collectivism. And the kindnesses, if you live in these traditional cities, you will not experience in the West, not near as much. And so that's what I mean. And oh yes, to just compare that experience in my hospital is when I have an image of a hospital in Canada. I already mentioned the story of my wife having very serious postpartum depression and psychosis, and I went to the hospital many times in several different hospitals, but I have one memory that's incredibly stark. That is about visiting a hospital in Toronto, Canada, and going to the psychiatric floor, because my wife was in hospital again because of suicidal thoughts and voices telling her to kill herself. And so anyway, I was visiting the psychiatric floor and walking down the hallway, and I noticed I didn't see any other visitors. I would glance into the hospital rooms as I walked by, looking for visitors. Didn't see any cards, didn't see any flowers. It was just desolate. And so the lasting memory I have is just it just felt like nobody cared about these people. Families did not care enough to send cards or flowers, the basic. And so these are the people who probably need love more than any other in society, and they're being kind of just warehoused in a hospital. And so I have that memory, and so I was, as far as I remember, I think I was about the only visitor to see my wife, for instance. And so that's my memory of patients in Canada. Sure, China was not about the mentally ill, but I cannot believe they would have such a different way of treating the mentally ill, because this society is about humanitarianism, and that's what this guy behind me, Confucius, is all about. If you want to boil down his philosophy, it's about humanitarianism. And I talked about it already. His whole orientation was to stop the conflicts that had been going on before China was a country. And so that's what the whole philosophy is about. And I think the key aspect of what he taught is called Li, which is basically ritual. And rituals, for example, would be saying please and thank you. And in this status conscious society is also recognizing the different status. So as a teacher in China, I automatically have this high status. So the students give you huge amounts of respect, way more than you'll ever see in the West. It's like night and day, and it is very rare to have any behavioral challenges. They're all very disciplined, and the times where I've told them off where they haven't been so good, I get a huge apology and gifts and so on. And so anyway, living like this, after, in my 9th year now, it just feels so safe in China. just so incredibly safe. You just trust it. You feel very safe. And I'm not the only person who's experienced this. This is a very common experience amongst, I'd say, any foreigner. I don't think there's a single foreigner who doesn't think China is super safe. And yet it's viewed as this dark place, totalitarian government that's ready to control you or trying to control you. Not at all. I mean, the freedom you get from feeling safe, I mean, think of all the times in the West where you feel threatened. You don't feel safe. What kind of freedom is that? That's not freedom. So anyway, there is a lasting effect that you notice when you live in a society that breeds safety. That's all I want to say. GoPro, stop recording.